Welcome back to Hacking Duchamp. This is episode 8. My name is Kevin Jensen. This one's called The Wilds. James Hillman once told me anxiety is money, emphasizing that our security correlates with quantifying our cash. And I think this is a truism. When I went to Mexico as a youth to, quote, be an artist, I had $300 and a credit card with a $200 limit. How far was that going to get me? I lasted about 6 weeks in Mexico City, then flew back to LA and got a job in a community center. I was reading Conversations with Marcel Duchamp, novels by the bucket load, and Will Durant's Story of Philosophy, in what felt like a race against time to figure out how to transform myself into an artist. But the real test of success was tied to getting ahead of the money curve. Duchamp died with a tidy estate of about $500,000 in 1968, if I recall correctly. Today his works, when available on the open market, of course command top dollar. A signed copy, as are mud of course, of his inverted urinal fountain from the edition of 8 reproductions, manufactured in the early 60s with Arturo Schwartz's financing, goes for about $2 million today. When Maria and I visited Schwartz in Milan in 2004, he showed us Young Girl and Man in Spring, now in Tel Aviv's museum. That small painting is today probably worth more than the entire apartment block that housed Schwartz's flat. It's not even that good a painting, but it is an important Duchamp. So, in real cash terms, Duchamp was able to create capital for himself and his heirs, and for the collectors and gallerists prescient enough to deal in his art. He seemed to do it while hardly working much at all. It was clearly worth investigating his technologies for creating, seemingly out of thin air, real, cash on the barrel real, value. If anxiety is money, and we can gain insight into how Duchamp creates value, then maybe we can relieve anxiety via real economics. Duchamp's alchemy turned industrial dreck, like urinals and shovels, into gold and presumably a good life. He said towards the end, in Conversations with Marcel Duchamp, that he was very happy. We should all be graced with an anxiety-free passage off the planet. The practice of painting in the Western European tradition is full of alchemy. It's not fixed in stone, but generally the rubric of alchemical transformations, symbolized as colors, begins with white, then moves through black, silver, red, yellow, blue, then finally gold. Interestingly, a classic painting starts with a ground of white lead, then proceeds with a grisaille or black and white tonal sketch, then transparent layers of color from precious metals or earths, and culminates in gilded, white, or silver opaque touches. Painting is not like forging steel. Alchemists and artists work more idiosyncratically than engineers, but all three practices, painting, alchemy, and engineering, share techniques like subtle heating, pulverizing, desiccating, bathing in acids, etc., with alchemy, which genealogically came first. In my opinion, most classical painters were in practice also alchemists. On the contrary, not all alchemists were artists. Some were just plain nuts. Artists also freely access the poetic discourse of alchemy, unlike most scientists and engineers, who are, by and large, not poets, with some notable exceptions like Einstein or Robert Oppenheimer. Since alchemy is a pseudoscience, ultimately the dividing line between crazy fool and treasured artist is, in Duchampian terms, in for thin. Duchamp himself often played the fool, but he was crazy like a fox. Take a look at him posing as a goat in soap bubbles on his silly stock certificate. You will recall that I was a math kid, literally tracked by the LA Unified School District towards a career deemed beneficial to California during the Cold War era. We didn't call it STEM back then, and there was a healthy dollop of the arts served alongside libraries chock full of books on aeronautics, fighter pilots, rocketeers, and physicists. I'm not saying this track was necessarily a bad thing, but it was a thing. New math, gifted student programs, and IQ tests were in place to help the system identify and funnel good candidates into the hard sciences. A career deemed valuable by the establishment can look both sinister and benign. Honestly, a scientist can, of course, be a noble professional choice. But even my old childhood chum, Stu, whose business card for many years read scientist, refused to work on Defense Department contracts for his old boss. I have a lot of respect for him because complicity in weapons technology is built into science, going back to Leonardo and even Archimedes. Scientists have to draw a line. That line got pretty fuzzy for Einstein, the pacifist, who drafted the poetic letter to FDR that kickstarted the Manhattan Project. Remember that I woke up and realized I didn't have to be a scientist, and with Duchamp's guidance, moved into a much broader set of givens about what constitutes reality or a career. Eventually, and as a direct consequence of pondering Duchamp, with James Hillman as a guide, I came to understand James's rubric. Quote, "What we call reality is that which we are unaware of as a fantasy." This quip helps put the horse in front of the carriage. The psyche pulls reality behind it. We live immersed in it, and even in tatters, like a torn painting, the psyche is what constructs our cosmology. But there is a huge obstacle blocking the reality cart from moving forward with the psyche's impetus: money. That roadblock will manifest as personal anxiety, which can and will stop us cold. We must not let that happen. Duchamp had a fascination with Gustave Courbet, 1819 to 1877, the French realist painter. Duchamp claimed that Courbet marked the beginning of retinal painting, art that is not allegorical, but visually descriptive, art that claims to portray reality directly. Today, our reality is constructed from sources like iPhone footage in a similar way. We index our reality based on images captured in, quote, real time. Think of George Floyd's murder, made undeniably real via the cell phone video. From the iPhone, we can trace a genealogy of oracular truth-telling back to Courbet's Burial at Ornans, a painting that moves away from allegories of death towards a frank depiction of a community dealing with the loss of one of its own. Courbet's funeral is a grounding of reality in an earthly grave as opposed to a rapturous resurrection death fantasy. Notice that everyone depicted is at the same level. Only a petite Christ is aloft, held by a minor prelate eyeballing the viewer. We are astride the grave in Courbet's picture plane of reality. Ornans shows the forging of our contemporary psychology without salvation. This huge painting, nearly 22 feet across, marked a turn in French art towards the descriptive, the psychological, and the political. Courbet broke with allegorical death paintings like David's Death of Marat from 1793 and coined realism. The burial at Ornans punctures fantasies, and wow, have my fantasies been repeatedly punctured. That prelate holding the tiny cross is looking at me, too. My quest to integrate post-puncture reality into a new comprehensive psychological structure paralleled my journey into Duchamp. That reality had to be grounded in economics, otherwise our journey here would just be the late-night ramblings of some nutty guy. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you for a subscription, but I do want you to think about what is valuable. Like the priest eyeballing the viewer in Burial at Ornans, we got to crack the poetic alchemical code and turn whatever raw materials are at hand into filthy lucre, or we are not dealing in modern capitalist reality. There's no religious solace left. That little Jesus figure on a cross looks like a scarecrow compared to the yawning grave. To whom can we turn for solace? How can we see a fantasy in this image of a real grave? James Hillman, at a 1999 lecture, said, "Try Hermes." As a guy who uses smoke as a paintbrush, you might guess that I love to barbecue, and you would be correct. Barbecue has a god, Hermes. The tale is told in the Homeric hymn to Hermes. Born after his brother Apollo, Hermes has to work with whatever scraps he finds to create value, since Apollo already snatched all the low-hanging fruit. So Hermes creates a lyre or guitar by sacrificing a tortoise. In the following passage, he conducts the animal into death. Hermes says, "Alive, of course you are good medicine against the pains of black magic. But dead, you'll make great music." He said all this, then picking up this lovable toy with both hands, he returned to his house, carrying it with him. When he got back, he took out a gray steel knife and stabbed out the life of the turtle that lived in the mountains. Then Hermes calls up the erotic union of his famous parents and shamelessly grabs for the wealth he feels entitled to. He sang about Zeus, the son of Kronos, and Maya in her beautiful shoes, and how they talked during their love affair, a boast about his own glorious origin. And he honored the servants of the nymph and her magnificent house, and the tripods in the house and the abundant cauldrons. Later in the same tale, he steals a couple of Apollo's cattle, slaughters them, grills up the meat, and serves it back to Apollo, who is delighted and crowns Hermes Prince of Thieves. Hermes, the patron of alchemy, can turn love and death into portals towards wealth and status. He could also smoke up a mean brisket. Hermes becomes the god of business transactions and also guides your soul to the underworld when the time comes, so he can shapeshift reality. Stated in Hillman's terms, Hermes reveals the fantasy behind every reality, even death. Courbet's burial painting was a commercial work. It helped make his reputation. Duchamp coolly promoted and sold the work of Brancusi. He also ran schemes like issuing stock and selling reproductions of urinals. Like Hermes, Duchamp and Courbet manufactured value with guile. Courbet by claiming Apollonian realism. Duchamp playing the part of Hermes by barbecuing whatever flotsam struck his fancy. There is a sleight of hand in all these transactions. Courbet's realistic depiction of a rural burial ceremony is, after all, something created for amusement. Later on in his career, like going to a movie, people paid tickets to see his paintings. Can we see a parallel to Hermes' tortoise-shell lyre, forged from death and used to sing of status and wealth? Courbet's Ornans depicted a somber burial the way some film directors use mob hits as entertainment. Here at Hacking Duchamp, I am writing variously about the death of a woman long ago, making witticisms from my father's break with reality, surfing the oeuvre of an artist gone more than 50 years, and digging up my old memories for the express purpose of entertaining you. Is this crass assessment fair? Remember, I am not selling tickets. No, of course a crass assessment is not fair. I believe there is something of real value here besides the quips. Recalling how this episode began with anxiety, I claim, with anxiety as a gauge, that we might glimpse something golden. In the burial at Ornans, the prelate looks the viewer in the eye while holding the symbol of salvation over everyone's heads. The painting looks to me like a gigantic query by Courbet regarding our ability to process the temporality of human life with our now secular epistemology. One of Duchamp's major sources for Étant donnés was Courbet's late painting, The Origin of the World, a cropped nude of a woman with her legs spread open. Interestingly, this painting was at one point owned by the psychologist Jacques Lacan. There's more fun information about this work on the related Wikipedia page. Check it out. Of importance to us here, Duchamp's posthumous État donné, following Courbet, takes us not to an open grave, but to a very realistic and erotic presentation of his lover Maria Martin's body. He gives us something other than Jesus to ground our psyches in, eroticism. As if dispensing an antidote to our anxiety, even at death's door, he guides our eyes towards his object of desire, and away from the yawning grave of Courbet's burial at Ornans. The ancients eroticized death too. Roman sarcophagi are carved with friezes showing death as the marriage of Dionysus and Ariadne. Contemporary examples abound. Bob Fosse cast a sexy Jessica Lange as the angel of death in All That Jazz. And of course, Duchamp gives us a peep show when we look through his version of Death's Door. We see a bit of, poesis in Duchamp's Eschatology, right? Music for this episode by Eric Lick Raymond, as usual. Please check the website for images and information. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.